On March 4th, I presented a report to the GUI NGL group. This is my response to the observations of several of their MEPs.
We do need to have a broader debate than we have now on the whole of the Eurozone and the repercussions the use of the euro has had on various member states, because we need to draw a distinction between the economic governance procedures which have been mentioned and the actual implementation of the euro as a fiduciary currency. I don't know whether you've got any comments to make in the light of what you've heard to wind up on this point. Diarmuid?
I have. Well, first of all, thank you for the contributions. I'll just address one or two points that were brought up, Nikolai, on the solidarity issue. When the euro was launched, a lot of the structures were taken out that were actually basic and fundamental to any currency design, but there were the fundamental structures, support structures were taken out, which were put back in subsequently. But one thing that is still missing, and you touched on it, was the solidarity. It's still not there. There is not. It's the glaring omission still. And Joao, you touched on the fact that this was a political project, and the report proves conclusively that this was a political project. It was never a currency project. And from the very start, in the design of it, like when they were taking out all these fundamental structures, it was because it was a political project that they actually still went ahead with it, Anybody, it was foretold. Everything that happened was foretold. This was going to happen. The collapse was going to happen. The calamity was going to happen. It was foretold in the 1990s. It was foretold before it. It was foretold. But it's not. The report doesn't focus on Ireland. The report goes right across the Eurozone. Portugal is touched on it. But what you were talking about, the development in Portugal before the launch of the euro and how it was progressing. Ireland, the story was the very same. One of the aspects that's touched on in here is what they call groupthink. And groupthink developed around the euro, and it is still very much in Ireland, and I'm sure it's in a lot of the Eurozone countries, where, you cannot criticise the euro. And the thought of any country like Ireland pulling out of the euro, is absolutely, it just can't even be discussed. And you get this thing that there's this massive approval rating for the euro across Europe. But if you were to put it to people and explain to people that the euro isn't just about being able to go, from me, to being able to go on holidays to Portugal and go in and be able to compare prices straight up because the euro is there, that it goes way, way beyond this. That if you were to explain to people in all these countries, and this was actually why the flawed development happened, that in return for this common currency, they were going to have to surrender major economic sovereignty, that they would no longer control their own currency, that they couldn't devalue, that there were massive problems that were going to be associated with this. And if all of this was explained to people, because like the governments of the day, they took out all these things, and that was why the euro, when it was launched, was so flawed. I worked in construction for 20 years, and you would know, it would be the equivalent of me as a design engineer or as an architect. That I presented a design to a client and said, that's the design, this will work. And the client was to say, well, those columns over there, I don't like them, they're blocking my view. Those beams over there, they're too deep. I'd like to make those a little bit shallow because, they're cutting down the headroom. And I knew, as the designer and as the architect, that if I do these things, if I pull out these columns, if I cut down those beams, this building is going to collapse. But if I then went ahead and said, okay, we'll build it like this. And that is what happened with the euro. They designed it, they let it go like that, knowing that they had taken out these massive support structures, and the currency collapsed. And I think it was the 11 or 12 countries that were in at the launch of the euro, 5 went practically bankrupt. How anybody could say that this currency is working, I don't know. And all the rest of them, like the national debt has grown astronomically. Ireland's national debt went from 43 billion, with 20 billion in the bank in our savings account, which was subsequently raided in 2008, to now over 200 billion. That was what we now have, over 200 billion. So this currency is just not working. And there has to be a discussion about a realignment of of the countries, and maybe, like, there is no, and this is one of the things that was deliberate in it, it was absolutely deliberate in it, a country cannot pull out of the euro. There is a space that we know about it with Brexit at the moment, like the countries can leave the EU, but there is nothing in the treaties, nothing that allows a country to pull out of the euro, and this was absolutely deliberate, because the idea was that, and you see, I've quoted the experts in the from the design phase, that once people were in, and once you got them in, that they could never back out, that to actually back out again would be more destructive for them than staying in. So this whole currency, it just doesn't work for Europe. There has to be a conversation around countries being allowed, some countries being allowed to get out of the euro. It was originally designed for 5 countries, and it should have stuck with that. And then they could have had a shared currency with the rest of them, but keeping our own currencies. But just to go on to Dimitri as well, you're talking in the recent elections, Dimitris, Sinn Féin got 25%, but in the latest opinion polls that came out, they're now gone up to 35%. And this is actually a second opinion poll. They're consolidating their vote. And I can tell you, as somebody who comes from a very conservative hinterland, Ballyhea is actually a very conservative hinterland, that an awful lot of my friends there who had voted Fine Gael, Fine Gael all their lives, they didn't get a chance to vote Sinn Féin this time because he didn't run a candidate prime, unfortunately, in our constituency, but would have been elected. But they are consolidating because people in Ireland are waking up finally to what is being done to us in Europe. And I think that this and the reason we've come here rather than coming to the door, the reason is that this is an EU-wide problem. And I think it can be solved. It can be solved on an EU-wide basis, but we'll have to work together on it.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much. A collective thank you for the work you put in, because I knew that Luke was supporting you on this, Dermot, and it was we'd be very happy to see you again to continue the debate and keep an eye on what's going on in Ireland as to the final form the new government will take. So thanks very much once again.
Many thanks to Luke, who has been such a long and consistent friend of the Ballyhea Says No campaign, and many thanks also to the GUI NGL group for hosting us for this event. We will be following up.